So this is very preliminary, and that's not an excuse. It's always I like presenting to this knowledgeable audience at the time when the project is like happening, and it's draft form, so that the comments are most valuable to me. Once the paper is complete, I actually don't want to listen to any comments. I want to submit it. But this is I've been working on this for the last 6 months, on and off, and I've got my data together, and I've got a story, and I want you to tell me that I'm right or wrong. And I've heard a lot from over the years from veterans coming back from the field about SERP, who've implemented this particular project, and they're on both sides of this thing. So here's the story that the data is trying to say, and for those of you who are very methods oriented, especially economists in the room, you might be disappointed because I haven't established causality in this thing. So it's association. So it's a bunch of correlations that you're going to see, and if you can actually tell me how to do the causality, I will treat you to lunch, more than one lunch. Okay. All right, but the point is that I think this is a big question. It's a very big question, and often answers to big questions are not that easily precisely identified. So here's a background. The background that's the title of my talk. I'll give a background on the SERP program, literature review, data, and some results. The motivation, I selected this. This is from the key strategic issues list for 2012-13, the U.S. Army War College. And they address this on page 1 in terms of what they want the boots on the ground going forward to also do, in addition to fighting. So this is a tough one. And so the inability of the interagency to source its support to land operations fully places a burden on the Army to provide stability and reconstruction capabilities. So should the Army institutionalize those required capabilities by designing a force structure that specifically addresses stability and reconstruction requirements. So it goes on to suggest, to recommend ways that the Army can broaden its focus from counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and training to shaping the strategic environment, preventing the outbreak of dangerous conflicts, and improving the Army's readiness to respond in force to a range of complex contingencies worldwide. That's a mouthful, and it's a lot to ask the Army to do. But that's the additional burden going forward that's coming down. And so the motivation for the paper is fairly straightforward, in the sense that I think this is a very relevant question. Do development programs reduce casualties in the field at that time? So this is a very contextual kind of thing. It's not a long-term issue. It's about on the ground at that time. Okay, you might call it stabilization, you might call it reconstruction, but it's emergency is the key thing over there. Okay? And let me introduce this the SERP program. Many of you are knowledgeable about the SERP program. For some of you, this is the first time you've seen this. The SERP program is the Commander's Emergency Response Program, which began in Iraq to supply vital daily services. And the goal was to demonstrate to the local population that the forces were indeed there to liberate and help. It's an important program, not in terms of the dollar value. Actually, the dollar value is pretty important. I'll explain very quickly. But this is the possibility of having a program that does those things that you saw on the last slide exists. So the question here is, did the SERP program work in Afghanistan? There is some evidence about whether the SERP program worked in Iraq. So in Afghanistan, $3.44 billion was appropriated per SERP over 2002 to 12. Now, compared with the 500 plus billion, you might say that that's small potatoes. But think again, because SERP is supposed to outsource. So this is cash in the hands of battalion commanders and commanders in the field who can arbitrarily, to some extent, give the cash out. Of course, there's paperwork to be done, etc., etc. And I've heard from from our alums that that's not something very easy to do. That's a deterrent. So because of the paperwork, many people in the field go like, okay, I'll just keep the cash because I'll return the cash, but I'm not spending it because it's very painful to go through the paperwork. But in general, a lot of money has been dispersed. And so this is really an emergency response program. This is cash to be given, and it's supposed to be outsourced completely to the Afghan population. And the Afghan population, 3.44 billion, you do the PPP calculation, it translates to over 100 billion US in terms of US PPP. This is not a small program in terms of the effect that it possibly can have. 3.44 is a small amount for the United States, given its commitment to the forces in Afghanistan and to the cause there, but it really is real money. So it can be a potential weapon, and there is money as a weapon system, MOZ 2009, and I've heard different comments about that title when I mentioned this name to folks coming back from the field. But it's an influential kind of document within the Army, and it's been put forth as a potential weapon that can help. Okay. So there are a lot of views about the SERP program, both positives and negatives. So the CSIS 2008 report reports both positives and negatives. So its positives are that there's a proven track record as a short-term instrument for demonstrating U.S. commitment to local population and their needs. It enables local cooperation. Negatives, there's a lot of waste. SERP funds are not used productively, especially these large 50,000 plus projects. Most SERP money actually goes into long-term projects, which is not what the purpose of the SERP money was in any case. That's the PRT stuff, and that's different from SERP. But these lines get blurred, and of course then you have the DoD and other interagency issues, and I'm not going there. Right, so money antagonizes factions. This is a very, very key thing. Already there is factionalism, and if a tribe perceives another as being unfairly favored in terms of money receipts, it just deepens the antagonism or creates new ones. This is a very real aspect in the field. So money can work the other way. Rather than creating unity, it can exacerbate disunity. There are some studies about the SERP program, and both qualitative and quantitative. Very few quant studies, but this is a superb study. I'm trying to actually get my hands on the data, but neither author seems to want to share the data. But and I can understand that. They surveyed 390 commanders in the field. This is by far, to me, the best study that has come out in this area, because it's one-on-one, and there's a lot of truthful revelation over here, and there's complete confidentiality about the reason. They say that SERP can improve economic development by creating local employment. That's number one. It can reduce violence by creating goodwill. And some commanders have used SERP to reconcile sectarian factions. Most commanders use SERP as a tool to combat insurgency and protect and improve Iraqi lives. I mean, there is a framing effect over here. If I'm a commander in the field and you ask me how I've used the SERP money and if I think that it's been effective, there is a proclivity to say yes. So there is a bias here, and the authors don't shy away from this bias, no problem, right? But you use the law of large numbers. This is 390 commanders. You're going to find 50% who are going to just say it off the cuff, right? So I'm saying I'm giving the benefit over here, no problem. There's lots of negatives from the study as well. Examples of SERP expenditures resulting in substandard products or none at all. This is especially true of very large 50K plus SERP projects. I found that in my data too. And there's an excellent case study by Stone as to why smaller projects may be better. There's a lot of great qualitative anecdotal studies which really enrich this whole area. There's a very influential paper. It's making the rounds. It's made the rounds. It's an AER. So for economists, that's like the promised land, American Economic Review, and they got two of these papers, and neither of them are causality things. So for economists, think again. If you have a big enough question to ask, you don't need the causality, or you can get away with it, right? And too often we are on the side of asking very small questions because they can be precisely identified. Berman et al. And one of the co-authors has this fantastic international security paper which has just come out about the surge in Iraq. It's a very controversial paper. Very briefly to summarize on the I'm not contesting the paper or supporting it, but basically they say that the surge was necessary but not sufficient. Without the surge, any kind of stabilization in Iraq might not have happened, would not have happened, but by itself it wouldn't have produced stability. What happened at that time was also a reawakening, is their hypothesis, and the Sons of Iraq stood up at that time supporting the project, and in their point of view that was the big event. And it wasn't coincidental either. I mean, there was this movement happening over here, and they complemented each other, and that's how it works. It's a really nice paper, very controversial. I'll let you read it. Data oriented somewhat, and excellent paper. There's various critiques about this paper, and they do find that SERP projects in Iraq were correlated with fewer incident reports in 2007 and 8. The SERP projects tend to follow incidents. They may suffer from endogeneity or reverse causality. I will dwell on that when I get to my own data, because that's the same problem with what I'm trying to do over here. An optimistic interpretation is it might be effective, maybe. Okay, the PRT projects in Afghanistan provide no conclusive evidence that they increase short-term stability. Now, PRT projects are not only SERP projects; they subsume SERP, but there are other things too. So it's not surprising that you won't find, because they are long-term projects. Maybe they're not done very well. I've never seen a very good quantitative study of PRT stuff. So I can't say. But this is a qualitative study, and they don't think. Malkasian and Maierli, they don't think that the PRT projects were very effective. So this is a bottom line in this particular study. I'm analyzing. Sorry for that term we. I should use I. I analyze the local impact of SERP projects in reducing violence. So local impact. Violence is measured by many different dependent variables. Number of casualties, IC is the international coalition. Host is Afghanistan forces, the government forces in Afghanistan, civilians, and enemy forces. One very important measure is enemy initiated action, EIA. Now, most of them don't get categorized as significant, so there is a separate variable which is number of significant action, or SIGACs. So it's associations, it's only correlation, it's not causal yet. And it's entirely for the pre-surge. So the Afghanistan surge started then at 2009, so it's 2010 going forward. And so this is entirely for the pre-surge years. As an experimental thing, it's perfect, because otherwise you get confounded with the counterinsurgency and the surge. It's very difficult to separate the two. But I will argue over here that it was fairly stable, that it wasn't a great increase in the boots on the ground. There was regional concentration, yes, but there was no great sudden increase like the surge, so that maybe it's possible that the associations have a causality thing there. Okay, but I'm still not totally going there. Well, here's the data. So there are two sets of data. One is violence and casualty data, and the other one is SERP data. They come from different sources. The violence data is now very well known. Is the Afghan war logs, AWL, made famous by WikiLeaks. And you might say that, how do we know about the veracity of the data, and is there an issue using this data? There may be all that, but it's been used, and it's it's making the rounds, and it's been used within the army. It's been used in the scholarship. It's been used in the academy, and it's making its way into policy. And the Afghan war logs data has been used by a National Academy of Sciences paper, 3 papers. There is a terrific statistical paper making the rounds about just using the Afghan war logs in order and connecting the kind of conflict that each of these events may be categorized into. So very, very, very nice paper. The data has been used by top level military personnel. Flynn, to sum up. So in sum, the Afghan war logs fairly accurately reports events. There's concerns about privacy, not about AWL's accuracy. So I've taken a lot of effort correcting aspects of the data. There's no privacy issues in the data that I use. There is I've taken a lot of time on thinking through matching my findings with these other statistical analysis. So the primary dependent variables are from the AWL data. What is the AWL data? The AWL data, so the AWL data is 70,000 plus events that are logged in by commanders in the field. So I'm sorry. And the data is exactly this. But what I'm doing is I'm just focusing on those districts. So there's about 32 to 34 districts in Afghanistan, depending on which census you want to take. And let's open an Afghanistan map. And so let me very briefly show you how we're parsing this data. Oops, this is my Afghanistan. Yeah, this is the story that I want to tell about the context of this particular study. This is a terrific map, and it's detailing the spread. So in 2001, after 9/11, there was U.S. presence which pushed the Taliban out. To cut a long story short, they pushed the Taliban out of Kabul, out of the country generally. Okay, and 2003 onwards started to witness the spread of the neo-Taliban insurgency. So they retreated into the behind the Pakistan borders, and then they re-emerged. And the green part of Afghanistan, so if you look at the map of Afghanistan, that's the north area, the northern alliance is from there. This is the west part, Persian influence. This is the southern part, and this is the eastern part. All the action is happening in this part. A lot of the action, 90% of the incidents and the casualties, 95% are in this area. And you can see that this is the insurgency, the Haqqani network, everything that you read about in the papers. This is from the south, the Balochi areas. This is the Gilzai tribe area. This is the Durrani Pashtun area. They're at loggerheads. There's a lot of stuff over here which is historically very relevant, and to the extent that in the Q&A that's relevant, I can shed some light on that. But this is the period over which we're doing the analysis, and the story about SERP, like if you want to push me into a descriptive theory, it is that the Taliban, which is moving back into these areas, they originally come from they have tribal connections. Okay, these are not alien to the tribes that they go back into, right? So this goes back to the Soviets and the origin of the Taliban movement. So Ahmad Rashid and other authors, that's the source of the Taliban movement. The Taliban was created along these borders, in the madrasas along these borders, and then they were unleashed back into this area, and they came from these tribes itself, and they have an affinity to it. So a descriptive theory would be the Taliban goes in, they're not very easy to discern from the rest of the population, and they recruit. And whether or not SERP prevents that recruitment or reduces it or aids informants, that's the margin on which you can establish some causality. The thing is that these are unobserved stories. If I had that, then you can establish some causality, because there's this theory, and then you can hit it. But we don't have that. But that's the descriptive theory. The Taliban movement is in, it's growing, it's recruiting, it wants the networks, and what it's using is it's using things like, okay, a drone happened this marriage party and civilians, innocent civilians were killed. Are you going to actually even thinking about anything but supporting us? That kind of thing, right? So that's a message. The other message is against the government, because the government in these areas, these are rural areas, and the government is very identified with, or the top people in the government, urbanization and urban areas, and so there's always has been that tension between the rural and the urban population, and so that's another thing that the Taliban can play on, and the main intent of the Taliban is to establish a state with Sharia law, with an ulema. They completely reject the present form of the government, as well as any future idea about having a democratic form of government or something like that. This is an Islamic movement, and so the data is mostly restricted to 16 provinces around the east, southeast, and the south. Okay, there may be one or two stray provinces there may be one or two stray provinces in the north area and over here, but otherwise it's focusing on that part. Great. Sorry, I'm spending time to set the stage here, but I think it'll be relevant. The SERP data are originally, this is very interesting. It's a public database, right? So Sydney is a central information data network. It's an online, real-time sort of data network where field commanders can input data, and on a regular basis they would do that, right? And now recently they made some of these documents declassified. Among the documents that have been declassified are the SERP project reports. And the SERP reports, there is 16,800 CERP project reports in this database. It's a fairly good coverage of the universe of SERP projects that happened between 2004 and 2010. 90% of those were initiated after 2007. So we are using data till 2009 anyway. Okay, and the first order of business is to match the SERP data to the AWL. So the SERP data has the geocodes, as does the violence data, the event data, and so it's a lot of computing work, but I map one to the other in terms of the SERP projects initiated within 12 months prior to the date of the violent incident. So this is my only claim to trying to get to the causality part, right? So for the SERP incident, the SERP project it precedes the violent incident, right? So the SERP data, each like row or each record of the AWL, the violent event, is matched to a SERP that happened within the last 12 months. Okay, not after, because you're not going to be able to that make too much sense. Now I'm going to put down my defense and just say this, right? It is possible. So the knock on the causality here would be something like this, right? That, hey, the commanders in the field, when they do SERP projects, they go to only the safe areas, but the Taliban is not there. And so if you wanted an association of violence with this, you would find reverse causality. Actually, not the fact that SERP is reducing violence, but SERP is located in an area which is not prone to violence. So every time I meet somebody who's been in the field doing SERP, this is my first question to them, right? So anecdotally, I think you can sort of reject this. I don't think that it's universally true. I'm pretty sure that it's somewhat true, right? But it's not as true as you might think. Because there's a lot of projects happening. There's agriculture. I'll give you a taxonomy of SERP projects. There's agriculture happening. There is irrigation. There is sanitation and water. There's education projects. There's compensation, for direness, for a problem that has happened, befallen a family. There's a lot of SERP kinds of events, right? And I doubt that you could lay that criticism generally on this data. But fine. Then I do a sensitivity to different time periods. here's a model for it's a very simple model, and it's an average treatment effect model in the sense that if there's a SERP project, so here's my data. I got 70,000 something rows, each event from the AWL logs, and then I'm matching a SERP project to it. Right? I will be able to map a SERP project to it, no problem. The closest, the most proximate SERP project to it. Right? Actually, I have 8 proximate things, but there's just a ton of data. Let me make it really simple. So the most proximate SERP to this violent event, right? If that most proximate event is within 5 kilometers, then I say that it's been treated, that region has been SERP treated. Otherwise, it's not. Okay? Of course, I do a sensitivity to 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 2 kilometers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay? But 5 kilometers is what you're going to see the results over here, right? So treatment, define the treatment. If the event, that's one of those 70,000 things, in year T is associated with the SERP treatment. And the treatment is implied if the SERP project is within 5 kilometers of the event. So just visualize the thing. An event happened. If within 5 kilometers of the event, there's been a SERP project in the last 12 months, it's treated as a, or it's treated as a treated. Yeah, otherwise it's not treated. Okay, yeah, okay, all right. So I spent a lot of time over doing this. Just doing the matching takes about 2 months on a very fast computer. So this is many dependent variables, and I'll have time to go through some of them. And let's see the effects, right? So going back to this model, I have the violent, the dependent variable on the left hand side. I have a year trend. I have also year fixed effects. They don't make too much of a difference. I have province fixed effects. They do make some difference, but not that much. You'll see. They don't change the signs, the coefficients, and then the treatment effect. Okay, so let's look at some. Yeah.
If there's no event at all in a region, what happens to the SERP?
So that's a very good question. The sample is restricted to only events.
Do you know the distribution of SERP money? What percentage goes to places where there's no event?
So this is a very good question. The data is not aggregated either to province or to that's the next stage. If I aggregate the data up to province, then I can use all provinces regardless of whether there was treatment or not, right? Here, there is no province, no nothing. I'm using unit level data. Very micro data. That's it. No. It's a restricted sample in the sense that there could be infinite other things where there is no nothing. So no problem. It's a conditional on an event happening. Now that event may have low intensity, 0 killed in action, 0 wounded in action. There was an event. Okay. Then they could have events with intensity. A lot of people killed, a lot of people wounded in action. Okay. That's the variation. So all these items are they're conditional on an event happening. Okay. If an event didn't happen, then that's a whole infinite, conceptually infinite part of the sample. Right? I could aggregate the data up to the 30,000 settlements that exist in Afghanistan, which is what I want to do, and then to districts, which are about 500 districts, because the governance of the meaning of the aggregation is really important over here. Most studies aggregate at the province level. It's a very important question you're asking, and I reject that. I think the province itself is very heterogeneous. You could do that in Iraq maybe, but not in Afghanistan. If you go into a province, it's heterogeneous. If you go into a district, it's heterogeneous. If you go to a settlement, maybe it's not heterogeneous, because a settlement is a village and it's made up of a very homogeneous tribal group, right, which lives by its own governance. The governance is a key thing over here that's driving this. The governance is tough and tight, then it holds together. Otherwise, the governance is loose, then it doesn't hold together. That goes to the bottom of the theory, how SERP can be effective. Okay, if you do it at the district level, to me, it's meaningless, at least in Afghanistan. But if you do it at the level of settlement, which this comes close to that, because there's 70,000 of these and there's 30,000 settlements, right? So if I aggregate it up, there'll be some concentration in the south and east, but So good question, but it's conditional on the Afghan war logs data. Okay, so conditional on event happening. So just very quickly some data on from the Afghan war logs, and I've checked this with many other sources, so I'm happy about the veracity of this data. Again, this is for the 16 states in the east and provinces in the east and the south, so killed in action. The largest contributor to killed in action is a Taliban is Taliban attacks, Taliban initiated. I won't use the term initiated quite yet, but that many deaths. Okay. If you want to look at the data over time, then it's increasing, but not all the time. There is variation over there. Wounded in action is another story. There is a lot of wounded in action contributed by friendly forces. That's the IC, civilian casualties, and host nation. Host nation is Afghanistan forces. Okay. Let me take you to the results. This is the first set of results that I want you to see. Okay? I got 3 tables, and then we'll open it for Q&A. There's a lot of other stuff that I've done, but I want to keep it simple over here. So these are Logit models, and so let me explain what's going on. So the dependent variable is the incidence. So these are the dependent variable is a 1-0 variable, right? So if in those 70,000 things, it was an enemy-initiated action. 40% of the sample is enemy-initiated. So there's a variable called D color. If D color is red, then it's presumed to be enemy-initiated. Okay? That's an imperfect measure. It's got errors, but it's the best we can do over here. So the dependent variable is 1-0 enemy-initiated action, and there are 2 models. One in which I've got the year trend in it, and the other one in which I've got trend plus province fixed effects. So 16 provinces with fixed effects in it, and the average treatment effect is given that that's called the log odds ratio. But what that means is the following, right? If or where there is SERP treatment, right, within 5 kilometers, the odds of an enemy initiated action decrease by 35%. That's what that 0.65 means. Okay, it's a marginal odds. So it's a very, very, very easy way to interpret this, right? So 35% decrease in EIAs if it is treated. That's a strong finding. It's a correlation, mind you. It's an association over here. Right? If you put a trend, then it decreases by 20%. That's not so bad. I mean, it's actually very, very good. Even if you control for heterogeneity across provinces, then that's true. How about significant EIAs? So very small proportion of the EIAs are significant. Significant are complex attacks, very well orchestrated, very well planned. They lead to significant casualties, right, on both sides. Significant EIAs, 28 it reduces by 25%. The odds of a significant EIA in a treated area is 25% less with that, and 33% less with just the trend. Okay. Then we've got killed in action and killed or wounded in action. And again, this is a 1-0 variable. This is not the number killed in action, that's the next graph, next table. So killed in action is the incidence of a friendly KIA. So a killed in action of friendly forces. A killed in action of civilian. There's action going on and a civilian got killed. At least one civilian got killed. Okay. Enemy, KIA, total.
So Kishore, clarification, have you rolled host nation forces into friendly forces?
I should do that. Thank you very much for that suggestion. Friendly plus, host. So this is yeah, you're right. So I have a friendly plus host, but it's not here. But this is only friendly.
The coalition, non-Afghan.
Non-Afghan. So you're saying that I should add host to this and see, because they're fighting on the same side.
Yeah, you used it in the other.
Yeah, but now I don't remember what the number is. It's negative, but I don't think it's this good, right? So, for those who are championing SERP, okay. For those, I'm still very agnostic. I'll tell you why at the end, but that's a good suggestion. Thank you for that. Yeah, right. The problem here is, take a look at civilian. So enemy, okay. You know, what you're saying is that you're reducing a SERP treatment is reducing the odds of enemy killing or an enemy that comes from an enemy initiated action, right? But this is the disturbing part on the civilian part. And I've scanned at least 20-30 documents on DoD site and other places to try and explain that. And a couple of stories could go something like this. So what this is saying is that it is increasing the odds of civilians getting killed, like the treatment is, which is a very, it's an unnerving finding because you have a treatment, and then so a lot of stories go like this: when there's an enemy initiated action, then it's fairly indiscriminate. So, for example, an IED is the form by which a lot of civilians get killed. Suicide bombings, a lot of civilians get killed. You know, you're doing a suicide bombing at a police post, there's a lot of civilians around it because they think that it's a safe area, and there's a lot of civilians getting killed. But it still doesn't explain why it's increasing the odds of that. I'm trying to get to this. When you add the wounded in action, the negatives are telling that the odds are going down because of the treatment. This exacerbates. So civilians are, the odds increase in terms of wounded civilians. Here is actually the numbers about, so this is a count data model, negative binomial model, where the number killed in action, okay, or number killed or wounded in action is the dependent variable. So it's not a 1-0 probability, it's actually the number. And the way to interpret this number is that if you're going from treatment to non, so take that number minus 229. But by the way, those star things indicate whether it's statistically significant. In other words, it's statistically precisely measured, right? Not much statistical error in that measurement. So that minus 0.229 says that if you compare a region, if you compare treatment versus non-treatment, the treatment reduces friendly killed in action by 22.9%. So that's a percentage, it's an elasticity measure, right? So treatment increases civilian deaths by 35.3%. That's an unnerving finding. I'm still like, you know, trying to figure out what that is all about. But it's 64% less enemy deaths, probably because this is a reduction in enemy initiated actions. And if you total everything in terms of the intensity of conflict, these are big numbers. These are big associations. They're politically, economically, statistically significant numbers. You can't deny these numbers. Finally, and I'll stop after this so I can get some reactions. It's these type of SERP projects. Oh, there's another one about whether a SERP project is more than 50K or less than 50K. If it's a less than 50K project, then it reduces the odds of enemy initiated action. I mean, it's local, it's actually helping the population. If it's big, it doesn't. It affirms everything that I've read about from stories that are coming out on the DoD sites and everywhere on the internet. And so the reason is that big projects probably kind of privilege the already embedded privileged class, and so that's the logic. And even Shapiro et al. Found it in the Iraq study. So it's a good confirmation of that, but it's a very, very strong finding. I thought I had that table here, but I don't. So this is by type of SERP project. This is very imperfect because even within governance, you'll have governance in some areas which spill over. Like other will have some irrigation and education stuff. So, but they've quantified this as other. So again, where the odds ratio is less than 1, then it's reducing it. When the odds ratio is greater than 1, then it's increasing it. So I'm thinking that this is related to the amount of money that's spent on the project. But I'm not quite sure. I have to tabulate it. It's an easy tabulation, but I haven't gotten to the grassroots over here as to why there's a variation across the type of sub-projects in whether they associated with lower odds of enemy initiated action, etc. I've got a ton of other results, but I'm going to stop here. I'd really like to go to Q&A.
So I think this is hugely important, and I like the first cut, which is very inductive. I'm going to look and see what the data are saying. I'm going to look for some correlations, some associations. But I would push you to be more deductive. There is a rich debate going on here that goes back to the 1960s about why or how you beat an insurgency, how counterinsurgency works. And there's roughly 3 models. There are lots of variations on these themes, but it's population security. That's the argument that FM3-24 makes. There are other arguments implicit in there, but that's the one it wants to make. There are arguments about governance. This is Fearon and Layton and per capita GDP and weak states versus bad states. And then there's an attrition model that says you have to drain the swamp by killing off insurgents. And I think if you went in that direction, it might give you some leverage on these stories, for instance, about civilians, right? Maybe what happens in these cases is there has to be a level of security before SERP projects actually have some kind of effect. And when you're providing security of the population, then the insurgent wants to kill civilians because that's their theory of victory.
There you go. Sub-projects devoted to security really reduce the odds of that, right? So part of what you're saying is addressed there. Just one comment. I like what you're saying because you're coming from a background which I need and don't have, and for this particular project, and I would contest each one of those theories in the context of Afghanistan. Because I'm not saying like it's specific. It's the same stuff that the case study people throw at me all the time when I do data analysis. So I'm throwing it right back. I'm saying that the heterogeneity in Afghanistan, and I'll let Dean Crocker speak to this. The heterogeneity in Afghanistan is very, very special. Born of history, born of power vacuums, born of interference from India and Pakistan, born of it's a state that it's an insurgency like you probably haven't seen anywhere.
This isn't a case study versus quant argument. I'm not going to let you wiggle away off of that. You're atheoretical. You're like Sherlock Holmes. The data will speak for me. This is like Vienna in the 1880s.
So it made for a good movie?
Made for some nice slides. But I think you have to take on those and use it to interpret the data, rather than saying the data will speak, because I think implicitly you're doing that. When you're doing it, and I think that to be more precise, to be less sloppy, you need to have engaged these theories.
Excellent. I love that comment. Thank you.
I have some suggestions.
Don't do the identification thing, but tell me how to identify. Tell me.
Thing one is, I think the maps and the stories you told us about the maps suggest that you really want specific odds.
Yeah.
Right? Not. So otherwise, different things are hitting different places at different times.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go here. Second.
No. Wait. So let me quiz you on this. So if I were to tell you that SERP suddenly shot up after 2003, you're gonna say that maybe there's an identification here?
I'm not saying I believe you.
That's the thing that.
If you went pre-2003, post-2003.
Okay. All right. So I've got one here.
Second, to think about you're matching on if the event happens after. So one way to think about causality, right, is thing one has to happen before thing two. So you can look at the reverse of this, right? Match on things that happen after.
I'm sure it doesn't.
We do it on if this is if the events happen after. So do it before and then look at the differences in the
Ooh. So what if there is this goes back to Rand's question. What if there is stickiness in violence?
So
then
you
you get
different times
you get into trouble. What I'm saying is that if I, instead of doing 12 months back, did 12 months forward, I'd still find some of these associations because violence is sticky. Not because, I mean, so, yeah, no?
But that's not an argument against doing it.
All right. No, I take that. I'm just saying what I think is going to likely to happen, but and that'll reduce the ATT because when I do a different diff, when I take this coefficient out of this coefficient, right, with the forward thing, then it's going to bash that.
I think you want it to reduce.
Okay. Good. Excellent. Good.
So you have data on who was affected by the attacks, but on the data of the attacks themselves, the significant events, like is there a way to determine what the target was? Like, are they
Yes.
targeting military convoys?
Yes. There's a whole description. So there's 70,000 things with like big description, big meaning like, it's a paragraph, right? Because the commander is filling out details about this. And it's going to be really like painful to, actually create a measurable variable, right, over here. But these statistical guys, they found a routine to do exactly this. So from that paper, I can answer your question with a probability, right? Like an EIA happened under these circumstances in this particular region, targeted at this facility, kind of thing. I can do that because those guys have the code, and I'm asking them for the code. But that's my next step. I'm going there. Because there is heterogeneity according to that, and so that has a policy implication. That's a good suggestion. I was thinking about that.
So here the unit of analysis is enough, right?
Yes.
What's the next level that you can?
Settlement. There are 30,000 settlements in Afghanistan, which is very small, self-governed tribal units. That's the level at which I really want to do this analysis. But I don't think you're going to find too many differences here than there because there's 30,000 of those. But the next level is districts. And the districts are very interesting because the district heads are appointed by the central government. So there's a lot of tension across these districts between the inhabitants of the district and the governance of the district. Sometimes it's in sync, closer to the Kabul area and the urban areas. Most of the places it's not in sync. Like Kandahar, these are strong men who run the show over there. Right?
So if you do the analysis on either the settlement level or the district level, then basically you can handle it.
Yes. No doubt. Then I can answer all those zero things and everything. It'll only strengthen the results because you've seen that the green areas are green, which are my data, and the white areas are no killings. So, it benefits me. I'm trying to lower the odds for myself, right? So still I'm finding this.
Theoretical and empirical question. So theoretically, you're finding on civilian population showing, maybe it's not so surprising that, to the extent that these programs are catering to the civilians, and this is talking about counterinsurgency, and you're talking about affecting the civilians, maybe it's not a surprising story at all, but it actually is a very consistent, I'm finding that's very consistent with the literature on
But Bareko, if that were true, right? There's a sub-project happening, somebody got rich, I want the money, besides you're in the other person's pocket, I'm going to get you, right? Then the enemy-initiated action should go with the flow of that thing, right? You shouldn't have enemy-initiated action to be the odds of that going so much down and then civilian deaths going up. That's the puzzling thing. I agree with you. So I was looking for a consistent story, right? These two kind of go together, but one going this way and one going the other way. I'm trying to.
Is a total number of?
No, even both total number as well as the incidence. In both ways, you saw that the odds go up for civilians, and odds go down for enemy-initiated attacks. So that's the part that
Given that you can only have a certain number of casualties per period, I don't know. That's
per event. Yeah, sure, you're right. There is a certain number of casualties, but I see what you're.
So the distribution.
Yes, yes, yes.
I don't know if
That's a very, yeah. So distribution question. I love distribution questions. I'll try. So basically you're saying that you take the distribution and you do, you're just getting the mean, average treatment effect, right? You give me the distribution of the average treatment effect. And I can tell you that when there is big intensity, then maybe that's where the civilians are getting killed, right? That's a good point. That's a very good point. So 2 questions. Ian, let me ask Prof. Godlevia.
So I think it's related, but I'm still confused about your dependent variable when it say the EIA. What are your zeros there? Are your zeros the?
It's not enemy initiated action. It is either initiated by the IC or the Afghan forces.
That just seems like a weird comparison. If you want to it seems like the better zero would be when there's no enemy initiated action and not necessarily any other action.
That's Ren's
which
point.
is Ren's point, which may I don't know. I think you might I don't know why.
No, there is a whole this enemy initiated action is not my dependent variable. It is the most popular dependent variable in all these discussions on DoD. Because it's initiated there.
Continuum of, I don't see why that should be the most intense and then the least intense would be there's still an action but it's not enemy initiated. It seems like the least intense would just be that there's nothing at all.
That's a good point. So like a multi Logit sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, and then you already have your negative binomial where you can inflate. You'd expect there to be lots of zeros, so you
Yes.
have some hurdle model.
Yes. That's a good
Zero
modeling
inflated.
point. I never thought of that. Okay, go, thanks. Yes.
One of my questions about the enemy-initiated action, does that include IEDs?
Yes.
Okay, because I was just thinking, a possible explanation for why there are greater attacks on civilians, this was a narrative. Saw when I was there was that the enemy is less willing to go toe-to-toe with coalition forces, or even with Afghan forces because they're usually backed by coalition. They tried that and it didn't work, so they resorted to using IEDs, and those tend to target less discriminately.
The question, Ian, is why would there be? Okay, so even if you uniformly distribute IEDs, whether it's treated or not, because of the concentration of the population so it's a happenstance of the fact that in treated areas there's a larger population. That makes sense because you want to do SERP where there's a higher population, and even if IEDs are distributed randomly, you will get more civilian casualties. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that may be an explanation.
And there's another narrative that happened at the same time there, and it was that a lot of the Taliban were funding themselves through extorting CERT projects or other projects in the area.
That's the high money and the low money thing. That's actually my explanation for high money versus low, but I'm not so sure about the civilian casualty part. Is that what you're saying, that the high money versus low money could also work itself into the civilian casualty?
Well, I think that the tactics themselves could account for a lot of the civilian casualties. The military forces, we learned how to avoid IEDs or how to mitigate the risk, but the civilians, they didn't know that, and they saw increasing numbers of civilians getting hit on the road by IEDs that were originally targeted towards coalition forces.
Gawande, who were, on all these different types of CERT projects, who were these implemented through? I'm guessing that not most of those were, maybe most of them were in the military, through NGOs.
So let me give you one example, which is like anecdotal, but in general, much in philosophy, all the money is supposed to be outsourced to Afghan locals, right? Not much of this should be done through NGOs, but these big projects beyond 50K do get done through NGOs or some agency. If it's a government agency, you can tell that this thing is not going anywhere, right? It's not going to win hearts and minds at all. But if it's a small project, so our alums, at least 3 of them, they were directly involved. So the young lieutenants and captains, they were directly involved in funding, monitoring, seeing it to completion over a period of 2 months. It's their money in their hand. So for example, Ian had this cash, I'm just hypothesizing. His responsibility and paperwork to fill out too, who you gave the money to, how you selected the contractor, who benefited, and what it looks like with photographs and everything. and what the state of the project is 2 months after it's completed, if you were there. Well, I mean, you kind of outsourced it to someone else if you were transferring out, but that's part of the paperwork.
Because from a theoretical perspective, the way in which NGOs or big agencies deliver their aid or deliver a certain project, whether it's like participatory methods or community agreements or forming association, will inevitably increase civilians' participation in something. It'll increase the amount of civilian participation in that thing. So from a development perspective, the way in which they implement services or goods or deliver a certain project could increase the awareness of civilians, which makes them more comfortable being outside, which makes them more prone to be killed.
That's a good point. Okay, thank you. That's a good point.
Time for one more question.
Tim Crocker and
First, I think this is, incredibly relevant to, obviously, 200 stage, but I'm not aware of anything like this, so thank you.
what did you think about your experience there vis-a-vis PRTs and this kind of stuff?
A couple of things. SERP isn't really aimed at development in the sense that civilian agencies describe it, so you might want to look at that first. It's aimed at stability, and agree completely that smaller is better. Because it's easier to oversee and it's quicker to implement. The other comment I've made, when you touched on it, the heterogeneity of Afghanistan makes it extremely difficult for commanders moving into a new area to figure out who's who, who's allied with who, and who hates who. You're under pressure to make a quick decision, and you can actually, and we saw it happen, decrease stability because the Afghan entity you're working through had a whole lot of enemies out there and your enemies, and you're not equipped to make those judgments.
That's the new addition to the theory that Jason was proposing. I mean, you could enrich this.
Theory building. And the final point I make, the controls you're talking about now are really sort of 2011. You've read the recommendation of the Shirley Wartime Contracting Commission. In addition to waste, there was a tremendous amount of corruption. And corruption, I don't know, it's worth looking at, I think, in the context of this study, because the Afghans can figure out
ways to do it.
Who's on the tape, well, and also who's on the tape. And it weakens credibility of government, weakens credibility of coalition. And therefore, I think has a negative effect.
Okay, you got a quick comment? Because I want to...
I was just going to say, you made an assumption about the timing between the project and the impact.
Yeah.
It takes time for an investment like that.
So
to
I
have
should
impacts.
go to 4 years back, yeah.
You can test the lag, right? You can use
It will only strengthen my result. I've done it. But I'm showing you the, I'm trying
the
to
other point is
knock
some of the
myself.
projects may not have any impact at all. I mean, and that's
Okay.
part of the problem, is
Okay.
that they're not all equal in terms of their.
No,
effects.
no,
If you're
no,
assuming
no,
$1
no
has
problem.
the same effects as the other dollar, it may not be.
That's the reason for this particular slide. Thank you very much for your wonderful comments.